morning. If it's nighttime, good night. Let's get on with it. All praise be to the Most High God. The Most High God comes first. Today I'm going to spend a lot more time, take my time to go through the history of Zionist Jews when it comes to involvement in wars and involvement in dragging the United States into wars. I'm not going to cover all the wars they dragged them into and so on, but I'm going to show you a lot of stuff that you did not know. And we're going to talk about the history of that. So that's the bulk of this stream, is going to be covering that. But aside from that, we're going to talk a little bit about Restore the Snyderverse. As you can see, we'll be talking about how now is the time is now for the Snyderverse to be restored. Okay, let's start off first of all looking at, and a reminder that we have just one day now. Tomorrow will be the 18th of March, and that will be the anniversary of the debut of Zack Snyder's Justice League, the 4th anniversary of it in 2025. It came out in 2021. And so to commemorate that day, we want to have a competition in which you can enter any one of 7 categories. So I don't have the 7 categories here in this particular poster because I modified it yesterday. So there are 3 more categories in addition to the categories that you see there. The categories are poster, trailer, cosplay, soundtrack, I say video soundtrack, art, which is general art, okay, and the other 2 are somewhere down here. It should be comic, as in a comic strip, which needs to be 4 to 8 panels in length, and meme. So you guys can have fun doing your memes, whoever gets the most popular meme. You also have the general category of art. You also have comic strip. The comic strip needs to be between 4 to 8 panels. It doesn't have to be a complete comic strip. It could be setting a story that ends on a cliffhanger. Whatever you want to do, it's fine by us. Okay? And so those are the 7 categories. Now, here's the thing. How are you going to label these categories? Now, we already, tomorrow, everybody's going to be hashtagging Restore the Snyderverse. So that's a given. But what you can do is, it must be your work. Once you are submitting your category, whatever it is, you will use hashtag Restore the Snyderverse. You will tag it with Snyder Cut, as you see there in the post, because it has to go to the Snyder Cut page, Twitter handle. And then you put hashtag your category, whether it's poster, trailer, cosplay, video soundtrack, comic, art, or meme. Okay? Now, and once you do that, people will just have to go to the Restore the Snyderverse site, and they will go through the different things. They can search by category, so they can go, for instance, Snyder Cut, hashtag poster, or Snyder Cut, hashtag trailer. So you just do the general search, Snyder Cut, hashtag whatever. And from there, they will find all of the posters, all of the trailers, all of the cosplay. And then you can just like the ones that you think are best. The person who wins will be the one who has the most likes. And in each category, the winner will be tabulated. By the way, the competition begins on the 18th, ends on the 18th. So at 12 o'clock on March the 18th, all submissions are closed off. So don't try to put any more submissions in there. And then what we will do is we will start counting up everything and getting the winners. So by the 19th, we should have all the winners. The winners will be presented on Vero as well as on Twitter. in front of Zack Snyder, etc. I'll tag in a bunch of people who could be sponsors or whatever, and they can take action from there. So basically, it's kind of bragging rights, but nonetheless, it's to display your skills and abilities. I already have something I prepared for that day. I'm gonna probably do my submission in video soundtrack, so should be interesting. All right, so guys, show your skills, show your creativity. I just wanted to put that out there. What else do we have when it comes to the Snyderverse? Do we have any more Snyderverse news? We don't really have a whole bunch of Snyderverse news, but I just want to get that out the way. Hold on a second, let me see. Not really. Just more for saying the Snyderverse never dies, and he modified the pictures. Superman's in it, as you can see there. Oh yeah, this is pretty cool. Somebody called ZG Wood says Snyder Cut. Ooh, a fan-made comic adaptation of Zack Snyder's Justice League. He's liking that. I find this really cool. This is dope. Look at this. Ben Affleck's Batman. Somebody custom made this. This is not. You have the suit there. You can put the top on Ben Affleck Batman there. He's got the spear. This is from BVS. This is really awesome. How they managed to do that is really cool. And it looks like you can take off the parts as well on him. So that's really awesome. So you can take off the armor that's on him. You can take it off. I don't know if he has the cowl, the bat cowl, so that he could just be in the original bat suit. That would be really dope, though. That's pretty cool. Oh, we also have the younger. We have the younger Clark and Diana and Bruce, which is really kind of cool. All right, so let's get to it, okay? So that's basically my Restore the Snyderverse news. Happy St. Patrick's Day to all the Irish who came to America. Shout out to Ireland for supporting Free Palestine. That's near and dear to my heart as well. And you guys are going to learn so much more now. But before we get to there, let's first start off with something that's kind of peripheral, but it actually matters a lot in the scheme of things. And hopefully I can tie it together with what is going on. But Glenn Greenwald, who is a Republican, but a guy who is pretty honest politician, he listens to this interview that Marco Rubio has with the CBS correspondent in Face the Nation. And up to now, he doesn't actually make any particular charge against the green card holder, Mahmoud Khalil. And it just all goes to show you that these people are just mostly blustering and blubbering. Now, he's talking about extraditing Mahmoud Khalil. So far, the courts have put a restriction on that so that he can't do that. They can't go through that process. They still have Mr. Khalil detained without any charges pressed against him legally. And they have him also out of state in Louisiana. I hope that the people go to the place where in Louisiana, hunt down that place and protest in front of it as well. He continuously uses the word Hamas, Hamas, Hamas sympathizers, Hamas, Hamas, Hamas. So this is his way of saying that somehow he just keeps on repeating Hamas, Hamas, Hamas. That somehow, because he's mentioning Hamas so much, this guy somehow is doing something as a visa holder, a green card holder, that's an infringement to American rights and so on. And he's causing disturbance and so on in the American society, and therefore he needs to be extradited back. The funny thing he said in this whole thing, which I thought was amazing that he would even say that, was he said, "We don't want terrorists in our country." And as I just made the comment, meanwhile, AIPAC, which defends terrorism in Gaza and genocide, buys out his corrupt ass. which is very true. I mean, he's talking about, what's amazing is this guy's talking about, how this guy's paid by Hamas and he's supported by Hamas. Yeah, you're paid by AIPAC. Literally, what you're saying is basically what Netanyahu wants you to say. You're a puppet, and a muppet at that. You're not even a good muppet, So it's one of those things where you watch at the blatant control that Israel has over these Congress people who have no spine whatsoever. And Marco Rubio, you can see that he doesn't even believe a word he's saying, but he's carrying it out because he has to do what his masters tell him to do. And this is shameful. And Glenn Greenwald, he says, some of us vehemently object to both. That's the difference between believing in free speech as an actual principle and cynically exploiting it to protect your own allies and views while justifying censorship of the views and people you most hate. The thing about it is, I don't even think Marco Rubio hates Mahmoud Khalil. I don't think so. I think he's just a paid politician playing his role and acting out. He's not even a great actor. He really doesn't sell the idea that he even believes what he's saying. He looks stupid when he says it. And you can see, when you see them looking stone-faced and they're just blinking and constantly blinking, they don't even believe a fucking word they're saying. So anyway, this is not what I want to talk to you guys about, but it is connected to what I'm about to talk to you guys about. All right? And you're going to learn exactly why and how this is so. And when you start to see how far back this goes and why AIPAC is not even listed as a foreign body, it's going to make perfect sense to you in a minute. Okay? So, but remember this. Shout out to Glenn Greenwald. And you're going to see why AIPAC has so much control in America. And now we will also address how you remove this parasite from the American public. How do you get rid of AIPAC? But first, we need to expose these Israeli lobbyist groups that have been here forever in America. And I will explain to you why they have been so successful in America. And they are not America's allies, as you will find out from history. They are interested in developing a center of power to run the world. Actually, I know this sounds crazy, but these Zionist Jews, they have a ultimate motive behind what they're doing. And it's to be the last one standing. And they want a World War III. So we're going to hear all about this and why Netanyahu's pushing for so much war in the Middle East. And you're going to understand it so clearly that at the end of this, you're going to get why these people are not good people. I am not talking about the simpleton Zionists. I am talking about the Zionists at the top. People who know what they're doing, have a game plan, have a strategy. I'm not talking about your simpleton Zionists out there who believes, they're Zionists, but they don't really, they're not involved. There are people who, okay, like for instance, the Jews for Peace, right? There are a lot of Zionists in there campaigning to protect the Palestinians, not understanding, a lot of these people, that's not the Zionist position. Okay. All right. So let's get to it. Okay. Shall we? Now, for you to understand what is going on, I have to include Congressman Greg Casar. Pay attention to this. Musk is trying to make our air traffic control system dependent on him by integrating his equipment, which has not gone through security and risk management review. It's corruption. It's dangerous. Fire Elon Musk. Now, let me explain to you why Elon Musk is not considered anti-Semite, and actually why Mr. Netanyahu and the ADL actually think he's a friend of Israel. It's because Elon Musk is working for Israel. They don't care that he's anti-Semitic. They don't really care. They are working in tandem with one another. Elon has business with Israel. And in addition, as you know, Israel is a state that sells a lot of software, whether it's spyware and all kinds of software. Elon Musk is in the software business, SpaceX, Tesla, and into the internet. Another person who works with them is Microsoft. Bill Gates works with them. Also, Google works with them because Israel is technologically speaking quite advanced when it comes to software, spyware, etc. So it is not surprising that Elon is trying to use software and put it everywhere in the United States system, because he's trying to make the United States like how Israel is, where you can cut off people's pay, you can stop a flight, you can down a plane, you can everything can be done at a touch of a switch or a button or by the internet, and using AI as well. Israel uses a lot of AI to use their drones. There's drone technology in Israel. So you have to understand that Elon is like an extension, at least for this, at this present point of time, he's an extension of this Zionist Jewish mandate to control the world. Why is it that they want to control the world? I'll explain that as well in time. But for now, understand that they passively, I have to use the word passively, control the world right now. And you're going to understand why Adolf Hitler, why he did what he did. It's going to make everything's going to make sense in a minute. Okay. But you have to, you have to understand how deep this thing goes, how far back this thing goes, to really get a good concept of things. And now I said certain things that you haven't seen any physical connection to that. But by the time I give you this history lesson, it's going to make perfect sense. Mexican artist Chavez Marmol smashes a Tesla with a 90-ton Olmec head in March 2024. Now, he didn't physically mash it up with a head. Obviously, this is artwork. But basically, he's saying that his tribe is absolutely not participating in Elon Musk's campaign, because Elon Musk is not for the people. And he really doesn't care about the people at all. Okay, let's keep this going. Now, before I can go any further, I need to begin. So there's a lot of things that I have to put in context before I go into it. The next move is the dive. But before I can get there, I'll start the dive by giving an allegation first, and then we'll go into the dive. But before I can get there, it's important to do this particular video stream I'm about to do. Okay. So let's do this video here. Let me make sure my volume's up.
This is your phone.
Do you talk to the Israeli settlers?
This is a very good question. And I will be telling you a nice story about it. I can speak Hebrew better than English. And I have a friend that is passing from here much time. And each time he is passing, he say hi. Who is it saying hi? You say hi. Today he been standing outside and he is asked me, can we talk together? Told him, okay, I have no problem to talk with anybody. He came here and he asked me, how do you believe that this is our fatherland? He is saying, I'm asking him about this subject you want to talk. He said, yes. Okay. It's a nice question and a nice subject to talk about it. You look. First, to say this is your father's land, this is history. This 5,000 years, 3,000 years, I don't know which number you are saying, it is history. And history, it is news. Maybe it is right, maybe it is wrong. We don't know. But okay, I agree. This is your father's land, and the news is correct. But I have a question. I want to ask you my question, and if you don't like your answer, you can change it. What is your question? My question is, your fathers before 3,000 or 5,000 years ago, when they came to this country, it was empty or somebody in? This is my question. He said in the beginning, it was empty. Okay, if it is empty, as your father came, my father can become. He said, no, there is somebody before. Okay, if it is somebody before your father is coming, it means it belongs the first, not that your father is the second. How is it your father's country? I don't know. From that moment, he stopped talking and left and didn't say hi again.
Beautiful stuff. So his argument is very simple. And this is the fundamental argument about Israel claiming that Palestine is their land. Here's my thing. And this is what makes them guilty. And no matter how they twist it or turn it, they're guilty. Even if it is your land, why is it that the Palestinian people cannot occupy it with you? You invite everybody into Palestine except the Palestinians who cannot return to the land, who were there when you came. That shows guilt. Then on top of that, you continue to take land where they are. You're kicking them out of where they are, and you're replacing them with your people. Why are you doing that? If it's your land, you wouldn't do that to people. If it's your land, you'd be comfortable with other people moving in. But you're comfortable with anybody who comes into the land except Palestinians. Why? Why can't they not have the right to return? That there fundamentally exposes why they know they're lying. They know it's not their land. But let's go to his point. His point is, you say it's your father's land. Okay, your father's land, whatever. So when you came there, was there people there or not? He said at first there wasn't. He said, okay, so you were there first. Great. So some other people came and they settled there and they were second. All right. So what's the problem? So he turns around and he says, no, there were people there. He said, okay, there were people there. So that means if there were people there, it can't be your father's land because he met people there. Right? Either way, dude couldn't answer because dude realized, and the fundamental point in this is this. Land is land. You can claim you own it or whatever, but even if you own land, you can't ban people from not coming into your land, a certain set of people. What country does that? Right? So, especially a group of people who lived on the land, that makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And that's the problem right there. It's my land, but yet I kick people off of it and it's mine. So what? Might is right? That's how we do it? And if might is right, that doesn't make you authentic. You kick people off a land that were there for hundreds of thousands, thousands of years, hundreds of years. You kick them off the land. They were always there. They're generations. That people always have been there. Oh, no. The Arabs, they came across and they took, when the Arabs came with their jihad and then the Christians came. And listen, man, the only person you're fooling is yourself. Regardless of whether the Arabs came, regardless of if the Christians came, here's the thing. There were still people living on the land when they came. They didn't ethnically cleanse everybody. The people, generations and generations of people who lived on that land, they just conformed to whatever. Some people died because they didn't claim Islam. Some people died because they didn't claim Christianity. But for the most part, most people still lived on the land. We've had so many different empires that came through on that land. Right? We had the Turks that took it over. We had the Arab Spring. We had the Christians that came through with the Crusades. Lots and lots of different political entities came on that land. That didn't change the people of the land. Maybe they converted to Islam. Some of them, some of them converted to Christianity. Some of them converted to whatever. Some of them kept their old ancient traditions. Some of them, So my point being, of all the empires that were there, they didn't ethnically purge anyone. The only people doing ethnic purging right now is supposedly the people who supposedly are God's chosen people, the Israelis. So that's what doesn't make any sense. You say it's your land. Fine. It's your land. Fine. But why are you stopping people from coming into your land who were there when you met them? It's yours, but yet you can't have these people there. What is their problem? Why are they're exposing you that it's not your land? You seized it, and you're trying to drive those people out. But there's a reason they're doing that. Bushra Shaikh says, you got to ask yourself, who started World War I and World War II? And now ask yourself, who will start World War III? Hint, it's not Muslims. Okay. I don't know about starting the wars, but below this, we have some information from Clemens and Blair you can check out, which is the Jewish hand in world wars, how they played their role in these wars. Okay, going to go through that now. And I said we have a history lesson that we're going to go through, so here we go. Okay, so we'll start off with what happened. This is a thread, and I'm going to follow Uncommon Sense. And we're going to go through this thread, and I'm going to find out that what Mel Gibson knew, because he did his homework about the Zionist Jews, and he had to go and walk it back when he said that in Hollywood. It's interesting. So, on Common Sense, I'm just going to start reading what he says. When Mel Gibson was forced to apologize, saying the Jews were responsible for wars in the world, everyone said it was anti-Semitic. No one asked whether it was correct. Let's review the Jewish hands in world wars. So that's what we're about to do. But first, I want you to just listen to Mel.
Used that night. Expletive Jews. And to Officer Me, are you a Jew? And the Jews are responsible for all the wars in the world. Are those anti-Semitic words?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Sounds horrible. And I'm ashamed of that. That came out of my mouth. That I'm not that. That's not who I am,
We have a world in which alcohol is used to excuse behavior.
It's always, alcohol is used to kill pain. And it is no excuse, by the way. It's not a good enough excuse.
If the police officer had been black...
Maybe. I don't know.
What would you have said?
Who knows? I'd have to get loaded again and tell you.
Words he used that night. Expletive Jews.
Okay. So here we go. Mel's really done his deep homework. He's done a lot of homework on the Jews. But that's besides the point. He had to do a redacted statement. He had to pretty much make an apology. They forced him to make an apology to the CEOs and powers that be and said, we're never going to work with you. And he, of course, Mel got blacklisted. Now, what's interesting about this is Mel is sort of somebody that Donald Trump refers to a lot. Mel and what's his name? The guy did Big and all those things. Forrest Gump, that guy. Forgot what his name is. Anyway, they're kind of blacklisted in Hollywood in a sort of way because of their political views. Hollywood, of course, being leftist, but it's not what you think. Now, let me explain a couple of things to you guys so you'll understand where we're coming from. Okay, Donald Trump, yes, he's a white supremacist, no doubt about that. So is Elon Musk, but you have to understand there's a power battle, a power struggle happening where Donald Trump has been trying to put, certain people in place. Israel and what Trump wants to do, they sort of overlap. Let me explain what I mean. Israel has complete control, or at least they don't have complete control because obviously there's resistance, but for the most part, they have almost absolute control over the Palestinians, right? They have the state-of-the-art military. They surveil them. Palestinians have no military. They have resistant groups, but obviously the resistance groups can't protect everyone, so the civilians are targets. Their streets, civilians can't go down. They can't even sometimes open up the back door of their homes and step out. It's real rough. They don't have civil rights. They don't have rights in Palestine. They're under martial law. Okay, so Donald Trump wants that for America. Elon Musk is working towards that happening. So in the sense of almost ultimate control over civilians, over people, Donald Trump wants that. Israel has that technology. But Israel also, at least the Israeli leadership, they also want that. They want bigger than America. They want the world. So Donald Trump and Israel, they overlap. Now, Donald Trump, though, wants to do something different, okay? But he recognizes the power of AIPAC. He recognizes the power of the Israeli lobby. So the reason why Zionists and anti-Semites get along quite well, or racist white people, is because they implement the same procedures. They implement the same measures. The United States of America is still not as draconian as it could be. It still behaves like if it's a lamb. It speaks like a lamb, but it behaves like a beast, right? You see, right now they're trying to pressure Venezuela, Maduro. They sent warships down there, and they're literally looking to invade Venezuela. The only thing that's keeping them back from invading Venezuela is the Russian presence there, the Chinese presence there. The Russians and the Chinese are helping to protect Maduro, against invasion of the oil refineries, which of course, Shell and, Halliburton and so on want to get access to, because Chavez kicked them out of Venezuela, and Venezuelans took over. They nationalized the oil refineries and stuff. So basically, America wants to get those things back. And the person who went up against not Chavez, Maduro, who's the successor of Chavez. The idea was that person would persuade, they did their espionage and so on to stir up a certain mob of people against Chavez. It backfired. Chavez won the elections. And since then, Chavez has to take some serious measures against the opposition who are looking to try and overthrow him by a coup. Now, what a lot of people don't know these things, right? The other point is, they've, of course, they start this great media campaign all over the world. It's Jewish led, of course. You guys don't realize it, but whatever. And they paint Maduro in a bad light as if he needs to be expunged from Venezuela because, he's putting the people under suffering, when it is the sanctions that America has put on Venezuela that are causing them to have to use alternative measures to make it through. The Venezuelan people support Maduro. Don't let anybody fool you. Okay. Now, having said all of that, let's get to what you need to understand. Let's go into the history of this. And you're going to learn a lot. Are you ready? Hold on to your coattails. In 1961, Benjamin Friedman gave an historic speech at the Willard Hotel, which explained how Zionists and Jews of the world had united to influence the U.S. behind Wilson in World War I. World War I. The Federal Reserve Act and the Guaranteed Income Tax. So they got Frederick Wilson to go into World War I, and we're going to talk about this now. They also got him to establish the Federal Reserve, and then they also implemented through the IRS income tax. Okay, and we're going to learn a lot before this is all over. Now, this is in World War I. We're not talking about. I'm not about to talk to you about. I'm not about to talk to you about Netanyahu and what he did with respect to the Iraq war and Libya and Syria that we've seen get downed. How he wants to go after Iran. I'm not talking about that. That's recent. We're talking about back in the early 1900s. We're talking about. Now, what caused World War I? We're not going to go into that. But what we are going to talk about that is relevant to this is we're going to talk about how the United States, that had nothing to do with World War I, how they got into fighting in World War I. That's what we're about to talk about, so let's get into it. They then later influenced Roosevelt to enter into World War II on behalf of the world Jewry as well. You may say, well, that's all well and good, but who is this Benjamin Friedman fellow? Simply put, he was a Jewish liaison that worked for the Jewish banker politician Henry Morgenthau Sr. In other words, he was an insider. He later converted to Christianity and spent his life being an anti-Zionist Jew. Below, he outlines the beginning story of World War I. The U.S. was initially mostly pro-German and isolationist in nature. The Jews within the U.S. were also initially pro-German because they were so anti-Tsar in Russia. However, when presented with the opportunity to get Palestine from a British victory, they used their power within the U.S. to push America into World War I. Okay. Now, don't believe me. We're going to go into the facts. Benjamin Friedman, 1961 speech in Willard Hotel, Washington, D.C. Let's listen.
Boys from the Atlantic, we were all asleep. I'm including myself with you. We were all asleep. What happened? World War I broke out in the summer of 1914. 1914 was the year in which World War I broke out. There are a few people here my age who remember that. Now, that war was waged on one side by Great Britain, France, and Russia, and on the other side by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. What happened? Within 2 years, Germany had won that war. Not alone won it nominally, but won it actually. The German submarines, which were a surprise to the world, had swept all the convoys from the Atlantic Ocean, and Great Britain stood there without ammunition for her soldiers, stood there with 1 week's food supply facing her, and after that, starvation. At that time, the French army had mutinied. They lost 600,000 of the flower of the French youth in the defense of Verdun on the Somme. The Russian army was defecting. They were picking up their toys and going home. They didn't want to play war anymore. They didn't like the Tsar. And the Italian army had collapsed. Now, Germany, not a shot had been fired on the German soil. Not an enemy soldier had crossed the border into Germany. And yet, here was Germany offering England peace terms. They offered England a negotiated peace on what the lawyers call a status quo ante basis. That means let's call the war off and let everything be as it was before the war started. Well, England in the summer of 1916 was considering that seriously. They had no choice. It was either accepting this negotiated peace that Germany was magnanimously offering them or going on with the war and being totally defeated. While that was going on, the Zionists in Germany, who represented the Zionists from Eastern Europe, went to the British War Cabinet, and I'm going to be brief because this is a long story, but I have all the documents to prove any statement that I make. If anyone here is curious or doesn't believe what I'm saying is at all possible. The Zionists in London went to the British War Cabinet and they said, look here, you can yet win this war. You don't have to give up. You don't have to accept a negotiated peace offered to you now by Germany. You can win this war if the United States will come in as your ally. The United States was not in the war at that time. We were fresh, we were young, we were rich, we were powerful. And they told England, we will guarantee to bring the United States into the war as your ally, to fight with you on your side, if you will promise us Palestine after you win the war. In other words, they made this deal. We will get the United States into this war as your ally. The price you must pay us is Palestine after you have won the war and defeated Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. Now, England had as much right to promise Palestine to anybody as the United States would have to promise Japan to Ireland for any reason whatsoever. It's absolutely absurd that Great Britain, that never had any connection or any interest or any right in what is known as Palestine, should offer it as coin of the realm to pay the Zionists for bringing the United States into the war. However, they made that promise in October of 1916.
Now, what you guys have to understand is the British took over Palestine from the Turks before 1916. After 1916, way after 1916, after the war was over and everything. So what a lot of people don't understand is they were making this deal in the event that the Britain took over, won the war with France and their allies, and then they would be, they were promised Palestine. They would pass over Palestine to the Zionist Jews who were betraying Germany. They were pro-Germany and they turned against Germany so that they could get Palestine. Okay, so they went to the enemy. Now, this is not the first time they've done something like this. If you guys know about the Bolshevik Revolution, where some of the Poland Jews turned against Russia and started fighting for Poland. So this is not new. They've done this before. And then you know the history of the Rothschilds and how they turned against the French. They were backing both sides, and then once they knew that the war was coming to an end, and they realized what the profits were, they invested in certain areas and made a fortune off of the war. The Jews are business people, at least these Zionist Jews. They don't care for any country except their own. So this is a warning to Donald Trump and Americans, which the Jewish, from a very long time ago, they have been able to infiltrate American culture since way back in those times, even before World War I. And it's very important for people to understand that they will betray you, because they were pro-Germany. They loved Germany. They were against the Tsar in Russia. Eventually, they orchestrated the fall of the Tsar in Russia through the Bolshevik Revolution, which was Jewish. So you have to understand that they're used to regime changing, and they're used to just turning against somebody who's supposedly their ally and betraying them, as they betrayed Germany. And you're going to find out more about this, but I just wanted to elaborate on this before we go on.
October 1916, and shortly after that, I don't know how many here remember it, the United States, which was almost totally pro-German, because the newspapers here were controlled by Jews, the bankers were Jews, all the media of mass communications in this country were controlled by Jews, and they were pro-German.
Okay, so this is very important to understand. In the United States of America during World War I, the banks were controlled by Jews, Rockefellers. The media, the newspapers were controlled by Jews. And they were pro-German before they saw an opportunity to have a deal to get Palestine by backing the enemies of Germany, the opposite side, Britain. And you heard the deal they made with Britain. They were going to go and get America into the war. And how are they doing that? Pay attention.
Because their people, in a majority of cases, came from Germany, and they wanted to see Germany lick the Tsar. The Jews didn't like the Tsar, and they didn't want Russia to win this war. So the German bankers, the German Jews, Kuhn Loeb, and the other big banking firms in the United States refused to finance France or England to the extent of $1. They stood aside and they said, as long as France and England are tied up with Russia, not 1 cent. But they poured money into Germany. They fought with Germany against Russia, trying to lick the Tsarist regime. Now, those same Jews, when they saw the possibility of getting Palestine, they went to England and they made this deal. At that time, everything changed, like the traffic light that changes from red to green, where the newspapers had been all pro-German, where they'd been telling the people the difficulties that Germany was having fighting Great Britain commercially and in other respects. All of a sudden, the Germans were no good. They were villains. They were Huns. They were shooting Red Cross nurses. They were cutting off babies' hands, and they were no good. Well, shortly after that,
okay, so propaganda campaign started against the Germans, all because the Jews wanted Palestine. A propaganda campaign. I want you guys to pay attention, because this has happened all the way back in 1916, 1917. They orchestrated a propaganda campaign. What are we seeing today? The same thing. Lies. They allege that Hamas cut off people's heads burnt babies, kill babies, propaganda campaign. This is nothing new. They've been doing this since 1916. In fact, if you go even further back than that, they've been doing it even before that in Russia and other places where they take down regimes. And that's what America uses. America uses the strategies that these Zionist Jews have been implementing for years. They trained America in propaganda. Let's keep it moving. That's why America's tied to Israel at the hip. They benefit from Israel a lot. Israel, the Israeli Jews have made America into the world power that they are. The problem is they're the architects of all these things, but they're not the ones running the world. And they feel they can run the world better than everybody else. So they're getting their own nation and state that they're forming through their propaganda media campaigns. And their intention is to run the world. That's their intention. They run the world, but they're the shadow government. They're the shadow people. They're the people that whisper in people's ears what to do. And they do it through their center of power is through the banking sector. Everybody owes them money. This is how they do it. All right, let's keep it moving. I want you guys to understand the truth. The truth will set you free, and you will know how to deal with the problem.
Mr. Wilson declared war on Germany. We trigger a world war that may develop into a nuclear war. Humanity is finished. Why will it take place? It will take place because we were all asleep. I'm including myself. Money into Germany. They refused to finance France or England to the extent of $1. They stood aside and they said, as long as France and England are...
So the media, they did a media campaign against Germany, basically. And as a result of that, they prod and pushed and persuaded Wilson to go to war, enter the World War. Okay. Uncommon Sense says, I'm not suggesting we should believe everything Friedman is saying. In fact, I think he obfuscates a little bit of how Jewish world power works by making it wholly Zionist, as many anti-Zionist Jews do. But much of what he says can be clearly backed up by publicly available information. The entire speech is worth a listen, and it's easily findable on YouTube. His statements about the Jewish influence on Woodrow Wilson, coming from Zionist Jew Louis Brandeis and Zionist Jew Henry Morgenthau Sr., are undeniable. So it was specific people who were speaking in Woodrow Wilson's ear. All right, now I'm going to continue his speech. But first, I need you to know who this man is a little bit more. Benjamin H. Friedman. He was born in 1890 in New York City. He died May of 1984. And what a lot of people don't know is, again, a lot of these people, Benjamin Harrison Friedman is an American businessman, Holocaust denier, and vocal anti-Zionist. Born in a Jewish family, he converted from Judaism to Roman Catholicism. Outside of political activism, Friedman was a partner in the Dermatological Institute and investor for small businesses. Okay, so that's his background. Let's continue. We're going to continue his videos and what he's talking about. But first, before I go into more of that, it's important for you to understand that Germany and America, they really never didn't see eye to eye with each other. America wasn't pro-Germany in World War I, but America, stayed out of it. They were growing. Their economy was growing at the time. And they were doing well. And now Woodrow Wilson is going to be drawn into this war. Let's see what Mr. Friedman has to say.
Liaison to Henry Morgenthau Sr. in a will it take place for a nuclear war? We trigger a world war that may develop into a nuclear war. Humanity is finished. Why will it take place? It will take place because Act 3, the curtain goes up on Act 3. Act 1 was World War 1. Act 2 was World War 2. Act 3 is going to be World War 3. The Jews of the world, the Zionists, and their co-religionists everywhere are determined that they are going to again use the United States to help them permanently retain Palestine as their foothold for their world government. Now that is just as true as I'm standing here, because not alone have...
Let me make it abundantly clear, because he really says a lot here. He's saying World War I, the Jews were involved in that. They got the United States involved in World War I, a war the United States had nothing to do with. But through their propaganda campaign and their turn against Germany to get Palestine, the United States and of course, certain influential Jews speaking into Woodrow Wilson's ear, pushing him and prodding him, he gave in and they went to war. We're going to talk about World War II as well. But we're not going to just take Benjamin H. Friedman's word for everything. As Uncommon Sense said, some of the things he exaggerated. But we're going to go into that a little bit. But we need to hear everything he has to say. So we're going to continue listening to him.
I read it, but many here have read it, and it's known all over the world. Now, what are we going to do? This life you save may be your son. Your boys may be on their way to that war tonight, and you don't know it any more than you knew that in 1916 in London, the Zionists made a deal with the British War Cabinet to send your sons to war in Europe. Did you know it at that time? Not a person in the United States knew it. You weren't permitted to know it. Who knew it? President Wilson knew it. Colonel House knew it. Others knew it. Did I know it? I had a pretty good idea what was going on. I was liaison to Henry Morgenthau Sr. in the 1912 campaign when President Wilson was elected. And there was talk around the office there. I was confidential man to Henry Morgenthau Sr., who was chairman of the Finance Committee, and I was liaison between him and Rollo Wells, the treasurer. So I sat in these meetings with President Wilson at the head of the table and all the others, and I heard them drum into President Wilson's brain the graduated income tax and what has become the Federal Reserve, and also indoctrinate him with the Zionist movement. And Justice Brandeis and President Wilson were just as close as the two fingers on this hand. And
okay, this is very important to understand. Morgenthau was a member of one of the governmental committees. Morgenthau and the other very powerful Zionist Jewish businessman. And they were able to speak to him. And then we realized there was also another Zionist Jew, powerful Zionist Jew, who was actually a judge. I am not mad that these people had positions of power. What I am mad at is that the American people were so duped into going into wars that did not concern them. And to this day, the United States of America, I don't care what Israel has done for you in terms of developing, establishing you as a world power, whatever. America has no business being in the Middle East. None whatsoever. It has been continuously, they talk about oil and all that, but you can get oil from Saudi Arabia. You can get oil from Canada, for crying out loud. You're not going to war with Canada. You're not invading Canada. They're going to war with certain countries because these countries are against what Israel is doing. And Israel has gotten these Jews, these Zionist Jews, very influential people, very powerful people, have been able to move the American governments into fighting wars in the Middle East that have absolutely not one fucking thing to do with them. Okay? So this is a history. This night, at least we're starting at 1916. It probably goes beyond that because, as you can see, these very successful Jews were in America before 1916. They were in Congress. They were in the Senate. They were in highest echelons of government and in law. So they've been there since the 1800s. Okay. Let's keep it moving.
President Woodrow Wilson was just as incompetent when it came to determining what was going on as a newborn baby. And that's how they got us into World War I, why we all slept. Now at this moment, they may be planning this World War.
Okay.
Hands, and they were no good. Well, shortly after that, Mr. Wilson declared war on Germany. The Zionists in London sent these cables to the United States to Justice Brandeis, go to work on President Wilson. We're getting from England what we want. Now you go to work, and you go to work on President Wilson and get the United States into the war. And that did happen. That's how the United States got into the war. We had no more interest in it. We had no more right to be in it than we have to be on the moon tonight instead of in this room. Now, the war, World War I, in which the United States participated, had absolutely no reason to be our war. We went in there, we were railroaded into it. If I can be vulgar, we were suckered into that war merely so that the Zionists of the world could obtain Palestine. Now, that is something that the people in the United States have never been told. They never knew why we went into World War I. Now, what happened? After we got into the war, the Zionists went to Great Britain and they said, well, we performed our part of the agreement. Let's have something in writing that shows that you are going to keep your bargain and give us Palestine after you win the war. Because they didn't know whether the war would last another year or another 10 years. So they started to work out a receipt. The receipt took the form of a letter, and it was worded in very cryptic language so that the world at large wouldn't know what it was all about. And that was called the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration was merely Great Britain's promise to pay the Zionists what they had agreed upon as a consideration for getting the United States into the war. So this great Balfour Declaration that you hear so much about is just as phony as a $3 bill, and I don't think I can make it more emphatic than that. Now, that is where all the trouble started. The United States was in the war. The United States crushed Germany. We went in there, and it's history. You know what?
Okay. These are all excerpts from his thing. And you can, as I said, you can find it on YouTube. Now, let's keep it going. But before I continue onwards here, maybe you don't trust a converted Jewish insider, but what about somebody from a completely different side? Here is Hitler describing how international banking Jews felt threatened by the Russian Tsar and the German monarchy. and wanted to plunge them into wars as a means to destroy the old regimes. This is his 1925 speech. By the way, the Great Depression happened after the United States got involved in World War I. The United States was a growing economy, was doing well, it was getting well, and then they got involved in World War I, and coming out of that war, the United States economy had been trashed. Does it sound familiar, people? What happened after the Iraq War? The U.S. economy was trashed. You would think, after a war with all the oil and stuff that you can get now, that the economy would do well. But the economy only did well for the oil companies that benefited from that. It didn't trickle down to the people. We always feel that, trickle down economics should happen if a country, for instance, gains more land, gains more resources. And no, the beneficiaries of gaining these resources and land are companies. And usually these companies, they don't distribute the wealth throughout America because usually they're not taxed enough to be able to distribute wealth among Americans. So it doesn't trickle down. And usually the owners of these companies or shareholders are Jewish. This is not anti-Semitism. This is fact. So Hitler's going to talk in 1923. Now you're gonna begin to understand why World War I spilled over into World War II, why Adolf Hitler thought that the Jews were scum and they were this and they were that and they need to be exterminated. You're going to understand all of this in a minute because there's context to this. And mind you, Adolf Hitler is considered one of the worst people ever. In fact, anti-Semitism came from, it emerged from the Nazis, right? They're the worst people ever. Okay? But we need to go into the story. So let's keep it going. So Hitler describes how international banking Jews felt threatened by the Russian Tsar and the German monarchy and wanted to plunge them into wars as a means to destroy the old regimes. This is in 1923 speech. He says that. You see, the Jewish power structure loves modern day democracies. They're easy to control through threats, blackmail, and money. Epstein, AIPAC, media control. Basically, almost all of Congress right now is controlled by AIPAC. There are few exceptions where that lobby hasn't been entrenched in there. JFK tried to stop that. He got assassinated. We're just going to leave it like that. We're not going to say who assassinated him. And then the gentleman who followed him, Ford, he just waved it off as if, and AIPAC became a body that was not considered a foreign agent. It wasn't registered as a foreign agent. Okay. They've always controlled media. The Jews are the head of all media. So if you're looking at news media, if you're looking at entertainment, they're at the top. They're the CEOs of companies, etc. I can Warner Brothers right now. The CEO of Warner Brothers is Zaslav. He's a Zionist Jew. You look at the CEO of Netflix, the head of Netflix, not the CEO of Netflix, but the owners of Netflix, BlackRock and Vanguard. They are Jewish companies. The head of them are Jewish. So they're gatekeepers. Okay, anyway, let's keep it moving. The only thing they can't control is the internet. So that's why we're getting this information. Okay, how does the information compare with Oh, sorry, I didn't finish reading this. Oh, yes, I did. Okay. How does the information compare with publicly available information? It's spot on. Literally, he's calling names. Jewish bankers Jacob Schiff, Bernard Baruch, and Samuel Untermeyer helped fund the Bolshevik Revolution and the Schofield Bible. We should include the Rothschilds in there somewhere. Okay. These are Jewish bankers. Now, mind you, Jewish bankers, which means they're somehow related to the Rothschilds, because Rothschilds, they're known bankers. That's what they did. You know, the Bible that took Christianity and turned it upside down by teaching Christians that Jews don't believe in Jesus. Who don't believe in Jesus deserve a homeland. But further, you got power. Who got power after the Bolshevik Revolution? 2 Jews. Vladimir Lenin. Did you know that Lenin was a Jew? And Leon Trotsky. All right. Okay. Now, the Bolshevik Revolution got rid of the Tsar, which is what there was a threat to them. They needed to get rid of the Tsar. So they got rid of him. They, of course, were led by the Jewish doctrine of Marxism, created by another Jew, Karl Marx. When people say the world wars were caused by banking interests, they're not wrong. They just leave out the fact that the bankers were Jews. Now, people say that's anti-Semitic, but it's fact, though. It's fact. Let's keep it moving. This is Jacob Schiff. Jacob Henry Schiff, born, and this is on Wikipedia, okay? To corroborate the information. Jacob Henry Schiff, born Jacob Heinrich Schiff, was a German-born American banker, businessman, and philanthropist. He helped finance the expansion of American railroads and Japanese military efforts against Tsarist Russia and the Russo-Japanese War. Samuel Untermyer, a powerful Zionist, funded the writing of the Scofield Reference Bible in 1901. This is long before World War I. The first edition of the Bible was published in 1909 by Oxford University Press. Here are some details about the Scofield Reference Bible. The Bible contains the entire text of the King James Version. The author, C.I. Scofield, revised the Bible in 1917. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Balfour Declaration came out in 1917. Arno Gabelin, who met Scofield at a Sea Cliff Bible Conference in 1902, suggested that Scofield put his notes into a Bible. Scofield met with Henry Fraud, an exclusive brethren at Oxford University Press in England. The Bolshevik Revolution, which this is all Wikipedia, ladies and gentlemen. Just Google it. Okay. The Bolshevik, or whatever sources on that. The Bolshevik Revolution, which led to the establishment of the Soviet Union, was led by Vladimir Lenin and his Bolshevik Party, a radical faction of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. Here's a more detailed breakdown. Vladimir Lenin was founder of the Russian Communist Party, the Bolsheviks, the inspirer and leader of the Bolshevik Revolution, and the architect, builder, and first head of the Soviet state. The Bolsheviks were a radical faction of the Marxist Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, which split with the Mensheviks at the Second Party Congress in 1903. The Bolsheviks seized power in Russia in the October Revolution of 1917. The Balfour Declaration was 1917, okay, which was the second of 2 revolutions in Russia that year. The murder of the Romanov family, part of the Red Terror during the Russian Civil War. The basement where the Romanov family was killed, the wall had been torn apart in search of bullets and other evidence by investigators in 1919. The double doors leading to a storeroom were locked during the murders. Perpetrators: the Bolshevik revolutionaries under Yakov Yurovsky, under the instructions of the Ural Regional Soviet. They killed the royal family, pretty much. Okay? Now, for those of you who don't know, the Bolsheviks murdered over 6 million people. They were ruthless. But people talk about them as liberation movements, just like how they talk about ISIS and Al-Qaeda as HTS. Just as how they talk about Irgun as liberatory people. Irgun, as we all know, was a terrorist organization responsible for the King David bombings in mandated Palestine. They also wreaked terror amounts to Palestinian communities and villages and towns. They also agitated a rift between the Palestinians that lived there, endemic there, and all of the Jews either immigrated there, or Jews in general, because they were instigators. They are still seen in the settlers who implement the same kinds of policies, the same kind of terror against the Palestinians and against anyone, including people of Congress. In fact, their Knesset. In fact, Yitzhak Rabin, who was also a very zealous Israeli who was looking at, destroying Palestine, taking it over, when he started doing negotiations with Yasser Arafat to bring about a Palestinian state, he was assassinated by the same group of people. Okay. They're ruthless. Don't get it twisted. So there's your evidence, and this is in public records. Then we have the most obvious sign of all, the Balfour Declaration, signed in 1917. Here is Lord Rothschild, another Jewish banker, going over its importance. This was a deal where the British government promised Palestine, a land they did not control at the time, to world Jewry for homeland. The astute observer will say, well, this was publicly signed after the U.S. entered the war, so it couldn't have been part of the deal to get the U.S. into World War I. Not so fast. Remember that our inside source, Benjamin Friedman, said the deal was reached ahead of time, and the Balfour Declaration was just a public display of this deal, meaning once they fulfilled their end of the bargain, they got the receipt, right? So this was after the U.S. had won the war for them, right? In 1917, this happened, okay. And the Balfour Declaration was just a public display of this deal. But we also have Canadian historian Margaret Macmillan, that Zionist-friendly, and British Prime Minister Lloyd George and his subordinates who were courting the Zionists to pressure the U.S. to come into the war, well before the official declaration. Now, here's where you're going to listen to Mr. Balfour talk about the Balfour Declaration, but listen to also how the interviewer talks about Zionists and Zionism. Listen.
The achievement of this
British history, and it begins with 3 words. Dear Lord Rothschild.
Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet.
Why was it that this letter was sent by the Foreign Secretary to your great-uncle Walter?
It's an interesting question because it was primarily a movement from Eastern Europe, but they didn't clarify who was in charge of that movement. And in addition, it was, after all, in Great Britain. So they felt that the Rothschild family should be the one to whom it was addressed. And Walter was Lord Rothschild, and he was a Zionist. And those really are the background reasons.
So Walter received the Balfour Declaration, and I have a copy here. And I wonder if I could possibly ask you to read it for us.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. I'm going to put on the spectacle.
Now, before I go on, notice the interviewer is also Jewish, right? He's wearing his Jewish cap thing. So it was a orchestrated effort by, as he said, East European Jews, which in this case were the consorts, German Jews, and even Russian Jews. As you saw, they pretty much built up an anti-governmental stance to take down the Tsar. And they've been doing this throughout history. We've seen this happen. These campaigns are orchestrated by Jewish people. But anyway, that's another story for another day. Let's just keep it moving. And again, when we talk about Jewish people, we're talking about people who have a plan to take over the world. Zionists, Jewish people. Zionism was long before Jewish people adopted it. Okay, it was a Christian thing. It was about, going to reign in Zion and the Messiah coming back. Okay, the Jewish people took this, and the Jewish people that we speak about is not the majority of Jewish people. The majority of Jewish people have always been anti-Zionist, but a certain group of Jewish people in Europe took this, adapted it, and gave their own version of it that is not in line with Judaism or with Christianity. They believe that before the Messiah comes, they need to have a city or a place prepared for him. This is not scriptural in any way, neither in Judaism, the Torah, neither in Christianity. Zion comes about after the Messiah comes. So you're not supposed to prepare anything. The only thing you need to prepare is your heart to receive the Messiah when he comes. For Orthodox Jews who practice Judaism, they're looking for the first coming of the Messiah. For Christians, it's the second coming of the Messiah. Okay? But both line up in the sense that it's only after the Messiah comes that we will have Zion and this reign. And only the people with pure and clean hearts will reign with the Messiah. This is the understanding both in the Torah. I don't use the Talmud. Please move that out of my face. In the Torah and also in the 66 book canon of the Bible. We're not talking about the Scofield Bible. That's something else. We're talking about the canonized Bible. Whether you deal with the King James Version, whether you deal with the Vulgate, whether you're dealing with the Septuagint, which is more of an Old Testament, it's more like the Torah. So Damascus in Syria is a very key place for Christianity. And right now that place is under war. You also have Bethlehem, which is found in Mandate, Palestine. You have Jerusalem, which is also found in Palestine. And the reason why these places are in Palestine and why they're not in Israel is because Israel was overthrown by Rome, Judea and Samaria, that is, in AD 70. And so there is no reassembly, but there's what is called, prophecy has spoken about it, the desecration of the desolation. And this is what's going on right now. Scripturally speaking, it's a desecration of the desolation, where they're trying to reestablish the temple, which they're not supposed to do. They're not supposed to rebuild the temple. They're not supposed to. The whole of Israel comes back together when the Messiah comes. It's not before that. And the Jews know this. And the Christians know this. We know it in a slightly different way, in the sense that when Jesus comes again, all of his people will meet him in the air, and we'll all assemble and all of that. The Jews, the true Jews, the Judaistic Jews believe that when the Messiah comes, all of his people will be united as one and one fold once again under him, as a shepherd pulls in all his sheep. It is not what these Zionist Jews are doing. They are trying to do the work of the Messiah. And that is blasphemy. And that is why it is called the abomination of desolations. They are committing great abomination before the Most High. And this is because this is demonic. These people do not follow the acts of the Torah, they follow Kabbalah. And just very recently, they were talking about these little idols we find inside the houses of, all sprued around, these broken little idol vessels of women in Israel. And the reason why some Israelis, at least mostly the settler types, spit and say Jesus will burn in hell and all that from their Talmud is because the Talmud is a Babylonian book. The Talmud is not the Torah. Please do not tell me anything about the Talmud. If you look at everything that these Jews are doing, their language, how Hebrew is written is Babylonian, their version of the laws, the Jewish laws that they have is Babylonian. It's because they're worshiping the Babylonian gods and the ancient gods of the past, which are demonic. The people who are exposed to these aliens that we talk about aliens and aliens. This was introduced by these Jewish people, not only in Hollywood, but everywhere. They're not aliens, my friends. They're demons. And you can tell they're demons because, or what Islam calls the jinn. They are demons because when you look at the policies and the things put in place, it is about human annihilation and control. That's evil. That's bad. If human beings have to be decimated in order for a select few to exist on this planet, we're already suffering as humanity. And a select few are doing well. That's demonic. God said, be fruitful. The Most High has said, be fruitful and multiply. God is a God of abundance. The devil is a God of black hole, consolidation. Consolidate this, consolidate that. So we have a group of Jews, with inverted commas, moving around the world, going against the order of God. As Babylon built a tower into heaven, so these Jews have adopted Babylon as their father, Baal-zebub as their father, and they are building this Tower of Babel up into heaven. They're trying to reconstruct it with the help of demons, which will fail. So the same Jews who said, crucify him, Jesus, and this is why we say Jesus is king. And if there's one thing these Zionist Jews hate to hear, just like when they stoned Stephen, and Stephen said what he said about the Rephaim, Moloch, your God is Moloch. When he said that to them by the Spirit, this is what he was talking about. They secretly worshipped false and foreign gods in the temple. When Jesus overturned the tables and exchanges, they were doing banking with usury inside of the temple. And it's, okay, I'm going to say a lot of controversial things, and y'all are going to call me anti-Semitic or whatever. I don't care. I got to tell you the truth. All of this homosexual stuff, all of this lesbian stuff, all of this hermaphrodite stuff, all of this sex change stuff was introduced by the Jews. Oh, we're going to see all of this. You're going to see all of this. You know why we have Islamophobia so much in the world today? Because the Muslims behave like how the Jews are supposed to behave. There are some compromised Muslims out there. But in Islam, lewdness and immodesty, you get stoned for that. You get shamed for that. Witchcraft is a no-no in Islam. Necromancy is a no-no in Islam. That's why the women cover themselves in veils. And that's how women used to be in the Bible times, even Jewish women. In fact, Islam and Judaism are not much different. It's just, in terms of maybe Ishmael, but the same prophet, same thing. It's mirrors. In fact, I'm about to say something that's being very controversial again, but I don't care. It was Jews that created Islam to fight back against Christianity. And after you see it. But in so doing, they actually blessed us, because here's the thing. Islam shows us the right way to live. And Christianity has wandered far away from that. And even the Jews who practice Judaism show us the right way to live. And I mean this in the sense of how they conduct themselves in the public. I'm not talking about Zionist Jews. I'm not talking about atheistic Jews. I'm talking about Jews who practice Judaism as it ought to be practiced. They are more modest. They are more concerned about humanity. And also they are more just clean in mind, because they're usually reading the scriptures. They're usually studying the scriptures. Whether it's Islam or whether it's Judah, I'm not saying they're not demonic Muslims out there. There are. Islam has its own Kabbalah as well, as does Christianity. I'm not saying no. But what I'm saying is that, and this is controversial, but I can back it up if I need to. These particular Jews that you're seeing here are of a certain sect of the Jewish religion. It is said that the Pharisees quicker listened to Jesus than the Sadducees. And I'm not about to go into this in much more detail, but just to say that the Sadducees didn't believe there was a resurrection. They already apostate. The Pharisees believed there was a resurrection. So there was already a sect of Jews that had already moved off from the Torah. And not only that, but here's another thing for you guys to understand. Remember, whether they were Pharisees or Sadducees, the many times God, and you read the Torah, many times God had to punish them for moving away from him and worshiping foreign idols and gods of other nations. Throughout the Old Testament, you see it. So you think they're not going to walk astray again and walk away from God? We see it with Christianity. We see it with Islam. We see it with the Jews. Telling me you're God's chosen people doesn't mean squat. I have to watch to see if you behave like God's chosen people. It's your actions that speak louder than your words. And maybe you're God's chosen people, but you ain't my God's chosen people. You ain't the God of the universe chosen people. No, your God is Beelzebub. Your God is Satan. Your God is the jinn. That's who you take instructions from. What you call aliens. Let's keep it moving.
Just to make sure I read it accurately, His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment of Palestine as a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Yours, Arthur Balfour.
And here it is, the Balfour Declaration.
Okay. Now remember, that declaration was made when the British were not in control of Palestine. Now they wrote it out after they had won the war. They still weren't in control of Palestine. But this was made before the war. Okay. Before they won the war. Okay. And this was done post. Okay. The Balfour Declaration was a public statement issued by the British government in 1917 during the First World War, announcing its support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, then an Ottoman region with a small minority of Jewish population. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to... He strongly believed in the near mythic influence. He was a devout Christian Zionist, making him an ideological compatriot. This is Lord... just now, hold on, let me just see it. Okay. I wanted to know what this was about. Okay, you have Lord Arthur Balfour and Mark Sykes. So I'm gonna try and read this, and you'll understand what it is in a minute. He strongly believed in their near mythic influence, and he was a devout Christian Zionist, making him an ideological compatriot. Immediately after assuming office, Lloyd George directed his staff, in particular Mark Sykes and Lord Arthur Balfour. I believe Lloyd George, it was the Prime Minister of England at the time. Anyway, in particular Mark Sykes and Lord Arthur Balfour to negotiate Jewish support. Margaret Macmillan explains. So this is Margaret Macmillan or source here cited. From early 1917, with Lloyd George's encouragement, Sykes met privately with Weizmann and other Zionists. Weizmann being a Jewish Zionist. The final and perhaps most important factor in swinging British support behind the Zionists was to make propaganda among Jews, particularly in the United States, which had not yet come into the war, and in Russia. So you have propaganda in Russia, and you also have propaganda in the United States. This was cited in 2003, issue 416, my emphasis. Okay. So he's backed all his claims that he just said there about the Canadian historian Margaret Macmillan, that the Prime Minister Lord George and his subordinates were courting the Zionists to pressure the U.S. to come into the war well before the official declaration. So there you see. All right, let's keep it moving. But perhaps the most damaging evidence of all of the Jewish hand in both world wars is a letter from Zionist leader and former president of Israel, Chaim Weizmann. September 10th, 1941, he said specifically that in the last war, which is World War I, it was the Jews who effectively helped to tip the scales in America in favor of Great Britain. They're keen to do it and may do it again. And here is a citation of video.
The United States into his National Zionist movement throughout World War II. The Weizmann archives, foolishly or wisely, gave me complete access to all the Weizmann correspondence with Churchill. And in the Weizmann archives, all Churchill's correspondence with Weizmann throughout the war years and before the war, and all his notes on his meetings with Churchill. And I'm only going to mention one of those letters here. It's a letter written by Chaim Weizmann, the leader of the Zionist movement, at that time living in the United States, to Winston Churchill in September 1941, 3 months before Pearl Harbor, when Churchill is frantically trying to claw the United States into his war, because that's his only salvation. And Weizmann writes to Churchill a letter which he says, Mr. Prime Minister, unless you grant us what we want, which is the creation of a Jewish army in the Middle East, with our own arsenal and our own weapons and our own uniform and our own flag, unless you grant us what we want, then you are not going to win us over. And let me tell you what we will do if you do grant us what we want. If you grant us our wishes, then we will act on your behalf in the United States. And remember, Mr. Churchill, he writes in this letter, remember, we are the only powerful, unified bloc in the United States which solidly backs the British cause in this war. September 1941. Everybody else is basically isolationist. We are the only ethnic, unified group which solidly backs the British cause. We are the only people who are in a position to bring the United States into this war. We did it in the last war, and we can do it again.
Church. Okay. Here is a actual letter, the 10th of September, 1941. The Right Honorable Winston S. Churchill, PC, MP, number 10 Downing Street. Dear Mr. Prime Minister, I wish to thank you for the very kind manner which the kind message which you sent me through Mr. Martin. I deeply appreciate it. Still, opposition has become so something critical that I must lay the facts before you by letter if I cannot do so personally. I believe this is the actual evidence, the actual letter. I can't really read all the details of the letter, unfortunately. I would like to, but that it's kind of difficult to read. This is the last part of the letter, which says it has been reportedly acknowledged by the British statesmen that it was the Jews who in the last year effectively helped to tip the scales in America in favor of Great Britain. They are keen to do it and may do it again, but you're dealing with human beings with flesh and blood, and the most elementary feeling of self-respect sets limits to service, however willing, if the response is nothing but rebuffs and humiliating. American Jewry waits for a word, a call. From His Majesty's Covenant. The format of a Jewish fighting force would be that signal. So they wanted an army. Let me feel, Mr. Prime Minister, that our friendship is not soured on the British side. Okay. So basically they wanted an army. They wanted to be armed up so they could do their guerrilla warfare, espionage, and terrorism on British Mandate Palestine. So they turned against the British, bombed the fuck out of them, and chased them out of Palestine. After they got the Palestine deal from them, they treated them like enemies. So they turned on the Germans. They turned on the British. You think they won't turn on America? Get the fuck out of here. They grew up in Germany, in Russia, and then they turned on the Russians. They killed the Tsar. This is what Hitler saw. This is Weizmann. Chaim Ariel Weizmann was a Russian-born Israeli statesman, biochemist, Zionist leader who served as president of the Zionist organization and later as the first president of Israel. You see why people thought the Jews were vile and so on? Do you get it now? Another thing Hitler pointed out in Mein Kampf is that Jews within Germany conspired against the German nation in the last 2 years of World War I. Before you write off Hitler as a crazed anti-Semite, consider that it matches exactly with the record given by the Jewish man Benjamin Friedman and how worldwide Jewish interests shifted from being predominantly anti-Russia because of the Tsar to focusing on Germany because of the Balfour deal. The fact that Jewish revolutionaries were making headway in Russia at the same time. Remember that the German Jews during the World War I largely had tons of commercial and banking power. It was not like World War II at all. Their fellow Germans would be none the wiser if they had a different agenda. So here's Hitler's comments on this. Anger, discontent, complaints. Wherever one went, government offices were filled with Jews. Almost every clerk was a Jew. Nearly every clerk was a Jew. In the business world, the situation was even worse. Here, the Jewish people had actually become indispensable. Like spiders, they were slowly sucking the blood from the pores of the national body. As early as 1916, 1917, practically all production was under the control of Jewish finance. Hitler returned to the front on March 1917, so he fought in the war, and was struck by a mustard gas attack in October of the following year. The gas severely burned his eyes, sending him to a military hospital for recovery. It was there that he first heard of the revolution. The Jewish Marxist gang of despicable and depraved criminals, that's what he said, had led the overthrow of the Kaiser, which was the head of Russia, and were attempting to take direct power themselves. Their revolts would be transitory, but the Jewish-influenced Wehrmacht regime would soon take control. I'm sorry, the Kaiser was of Germany. But the Jewish-influenced Wehrmacht regime would soon take control of the nation, and this was scarcely any better. It was precisely these events that led Hitler to become politically active. See, he wasn't a crazy guy. He saw what they did to his country, and so he was like, we got to do something about this. Without weapons, the front would collapse in a few weeks. The offensive would be prevented, the political agreement saved, and the international capital made ruler of Germany. Cheating the people was the inner goal of the Marxists, and they succeeded. It was the destruction of the national economy in order to establish the rule of international capital, and it happened thanks to the stupidity and gullibility of one side and the enormous cowardice of the other. The munitions strike was not as successful as was hoped, and did not deprive the front line of weaponry and armaments. It collapsed too early for the weapons shortage alone to condemn the army to destruction according to the plan. However, the moral damage that was done was so much worse. First, what was the army fighting if for people at home did not want victory? Who were the enormous sacrifices and hardships for? The soldiers were sent out and told to fight for victory, and at home they strike against it. Second, what was the effect upon the enemy? So while the Germans were fighting this war, the people back at home were striking against them. This is what the Jews were doing. In the winter of 1917-1918, large clouds rose for the first time on the Allied sky. For almost 4 years, the Allies leaned against the German giant and had been unable to topple him. He was the one arm holding a shield for defense, in which was left his sword arm free to swing at the east, west, and south. Now, the arm was finally free from his battles behind. Rivers of blood flowed before and succeeded in smashing one of his adversaries. Now this giant could turn, and the sword joined the shield in the west. The enemy had not succeeded so far in breaking down the defense. The attack would now fall completely on him. The enemy dreaded him and feared the imminent victory. That's Mein Kampf. What happened at the end of the war? This part of the story you should mostly know by now. Germany was forced to pay outrageous reparations, and the Weimar Republic became a hub of degeneracy and filth. However, did you know that the Weimar Republic and degenerate filth was owned and predominantly ushered in by Jews? This, of course, led to rising anti-Semitism and Hitler's popularity as he eventually led Germany to the NADP government. The extreme Jewish influence was well described by a philo-Semitic and Pulitzer Prize-winning American journalist, Edgar Moura, writing in 1933, noted that a large number of Jews entered the Social Democratic Party, SPD, which inherited power as a result of the November Revolution. Other Jews flocked to the Democratic Party, DDP, a group which certainly overlooked no chance to favor the interests of trade, banking, and stock exchange. It's interesting that then, as now, Jews seem to have covered all the bases. Liberal, left-wing, Jews dominated the SPD, and the capitalist, right-wing, Jews dominated the DDP. Thus, no matter which party emerged with control, Jews contained influence. Success for them was guaranteed. Maurer makes precisely this point. In post-war politics, any number of Jews rose to leadership, both in the Reich and in the federal states. Jews, particularly Social Democrats, became cabinet ministers. In the bureaucracy, the Jews rose rapidly to leading positions. Until about 1930, their number seemed on the increase. In short, after the revolution, the Jews came in Germany to play in politics and administration that same considerable part that they had previously won by open competition in business, trade, banking, the press, the arts, the sciences, and intellectual and cultural life of the country. The new Weimar Republic was duly signed into law in August 1919. Unsurprisingly, it was notably friendly to German Jews, removing all remnants of legal obstructions and granting them full access to business, academia, government, the very process that Maurer described. As Haggett Lavsky, 1996, says, all remaining discrimination was abolished, and there were no restrictions on participation in German life. The vital role played by Weimar Jews is concisely explained by Walter Laqueur.
Prostitution was legalized in 1927. Mother and daughter teams offered their services to the same client simultaneously. There were no fewer than 17 different prostitute types in this brothel city.
There were clubs where lesbians liked to whip schoolboys, and you'd find military officers sitting there with children sitting on their laps. So a lot of it was play acting, but there were quite a lot of people who also indulged in it.
The first homosexual and transsexual propaganda theater plays were made in Berlin in the 1920s. The first adultery theater plays were made by Jewish authors.
Places that you hadn't noticed would turn into outrageous strip clubs. The basements of the restaurants would be homosexual or lesbian romper rooms and sex clubs. When you have unemployed, you also have an increase in sex workers. But it wasn't just Berliners. It was tens and maybe hundreds of thousands of young boys and young girls who were coming to Berlin to participate in this hard currency sex traffic.
It was a city that was filled with lesbian life. There was the idea that everywhere you went, you didn't have to hide what you were.
Pedophilia was normalized. Underage girls managed to make a lucrative living in Berlin as prostitutes. Little girls were freely available and could be ordered by telephone and deliver like takeaway meals to clients.
Every intellectual was leftish. The whole political right wing, which basically came from Munich, did not play any role in the beginning. The whole town was in the hands of leftish ideas.
Dr. Manfred Reifer, a well-known leader of the Jews of Bukovina, said, whilst large sections of the German nation were struggling for the preservation of their race, we Jews filled the streets of Germany with our vociferations. We supplied the press with articles on the subjects of its Christmas and Easter, and administered to its religious beliefs in the manner we considered suitable. We ridiculed the highest ideals of the German nation and profaned the matters which it holds sacred. Jewish-owned publishing houses like Benjamin Harfst, Leon Hirsch, and Jacob Stahl and Company were distributing books that openly undermine Western traditional values. Jews also pushed an intensive campaign for free abortion, as Dr. Max Hodden Dr. Lothar Wolff, Martha Rubin Wolff, Alphonse Goldschmidt wrote numerous articles encouraging abortion and birth control for the Germans to lower their birth rates even further. Leading the film and theater businesses were Jews such as Joseph von Sternberg, Bertolt Brecht, Erich Pommer, and a host of other Jews. Research into sexuality was led by Jewish sexologists Ivan Bloch and Magnus Hirschfeld. The transgender community encouraged primitive sex operations because men and women no longer felt comfortable in their natural roles. With prostitution, drugs, pedophilia, homosexuality, adultery, sadism, masochism, decadent art, and even bestiality rampant, Germany was an unsafe place for the traditional German family. The conservative Germans looked at Berlin with disdain, destroying what was left of the national spirit. Criminal gangs lived from prostitution, drug trafficking, illegal gambling, pornography, robbery, and burglary. The police were underpaid, corrupt, and felt totally powerless because of the constitutional limitations of police authority. Maurice Samuel was a Romanian-born Jewish and Zionist novelist, translator, and lecturer. In 1924, he stated explicitly in his own book, You Gentiles, that we Jews, we are the destroyers and will remain the destroyers forever. Nothing that you will do will meet our needs and demands. We will forever destroy because we want a world of our own. The Jew Dr. Kurt Münzer wrote in his novel Der Weg nach Zion, The Way to Zion, we have corrupted the blood of all the races of Europe. Perhaps we have infected them. Today, everything is unified. Our thinking is in everything living. Our spirit rules the world. We are the masters. For everything that has power today is the child of our spirit. One may hate us, one may drive us away, our enemies may triumph over our physical weakness, but we are no longer to be gotten rid of. We have devoured the peoples, conquered the races, defiled them, broken their strength, made everything rotten, lazy, and corrupt with our stale culture. Our spirit can no longer be exterminated. Rabbi Harry Wotton said, the communist soul is the soul of Judaism. When we look deeper into the nature of communism, we see that it's essentially nothing else than Judaism. Since the Jews are the highest and most cultural people on earth, the Jews have a right to subordinate to themselves the rest of mankind and to be the masters over the whole world. The Jews will become the masters over the whole earth, and they will subordinate to themselves all nations. Judaism is communism, internationalism, the universal brotherhood of man, the emancipation of the working class and the human society. It is with these spiritual weapons that the Jews will conquer the world and the human race. The Aryans will be destroyed, and Marxism will triumph. The honest Weimar Jewish poet Stefan Zweig now feared a backlash against Jewry, saying, "It's disgusting how Jews are taking everything by storm. Should it not be our responsibility to anticipate the justified anti-Semitic indignation and call our people back to their senses?"
So it's kind of crazy to hear this because these are the stories that have not been told. Now, the thing about it was the whole Holocaust and all of that, you know, Jews carried out some of that stuff as well that were working under Hitler. And that's why Hitler kind of became corrupt himself, being partly Jewish as well. Anyway, here we go. Upon Hitler becoming chancellor in 1933, the world Jewry immediately made him public enemy number one, as expressed by the below headline. Judea declares war on Germany. From there on, the Jewish hands to orchestrate World War II went to work. Judea declares war on Germany. Jews of all the world unite in action. This is 1933. Hitler comes to power. Boycott of German goods, mass demonstrations in many districts, dramatic action, high wages for steel workers, so they started protesting. But didn't World War II start from Germany's invasion of Poland? Kinda. Obviously, Germany did invade Poland in 1939 But did you know the Soviet Union invaded Poland 16 days after? Why did Britain side with the anti-Marxist Germans over the Marxist Russians? Why did Germany invade in the first place? The main reason Germany invaded was because it was a territorial dispute in the first place. Look at any European map pre-World War I, you will see the German Empire contained large swaths of Poland. Further, the specific region in question, Danzig, still had a large German population. Hitler was getting reports of German massacres by the Poles in that region and decided to invade. By the way, the Poles who were doing these massacres on Germans were Jewish. If the Allies' main reason for the World War II was to protect Poland, they did a terrible job. In the end, they gave it to Stalin. If international Jews wanted to start a world war to end Hitler's regime and kill millions of Gentiles and expand Jewish power worldwide, then everything went according to plan. The invasion of Poland, also known as the September Campaign, Polish Campaign, and Polish Defense War of 1939, was a joint attack in the Republic of Poland by Nazi Germany, the Slovak Republic, and the Soviet Union, which marked the beginning of World War II. On September 17, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east, 16 days after the Nazi Germany invaded the West, as part of a prearranged plan outlined in the secret protocol of Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Here's a more detailed breakdown. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, this non-aggression pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, signed on August 23, 1939, included a secret protocol that divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, with Poland being a key target. German invasion. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland from the west, initiating World War II. 16 days later, on September 17, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east, fulfilling its part of the pact. Following the invasions, Poland was divided between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, with the Soviets annexing eastern Poland. There's the diagram map. There's the German Empire. There you have the Russian Empire. This is Europe in 1913 after the Treaty of London. So as you can see, parts of Poland were occupied by Germany, parts of Poland were occupied by Russia. Well, it wasn't Poland at the time, it now became Poland. And you can see parts of Poland above in white. Okay, let's keep this moving. If saving Poland wasn't the goal, why did Churchill promote the war so aggressively? What was the reasoning? Did you know when Churchill was down Did you know when Churchill was down on luck, he was financed by a group of predominantly Jewish bankers known as the Focus? When viewed objectively, one comes away with the view that Churchill was simply a drunken stooge who destroyed the British Empire for personal glory at the behest of world Jewry. Okay. Let's just hear this brother here speak.
Churchill's career. Rome, the mother of Churchill was Jewish, and this had been reported in Jerusalem newspaper, I think, a few months ago. And now I'm obviously looking into that. She had Jewish blood in her maternal line. Very interesting indeed. I don't think Churchill was cognizant of that fact. He never mentioned it. But what is interesting are his links with the Jewish community, which I'll go into in a little bit of detail here. The two basic areas of interest to look at in Churchill's career are the period when he was in the so-called wilderness, when he resigned from Stanley Baldwin's cabinet as a minister, and for the next 10 years, until 1939, he was out of office, out of any office at all. He was just a member of Parliament. So all he had was his salary as a member of Parliament and his rather pitiful earnings as a journalist, and yet somehow he managed to support an enormous country estate, which cost a very large sum of money to support, with all the gardeners and the nurseries and the nurses and the nannies and the cooks and the housekeepers and all the rest of it. He had a private staff of sometimes 20 or 30 people, all supported on his salary as a member of Parliament, which was at that time £500 per annum, $750 a year. Or $2,000 actually, because at that time I think it was $4 to the pound. How did he do it? Well, the answer is that from 1936 onwards, he was financed by a little secret pressure group called the Focus. You won't find much reference to the Focus in the history books, but it certainly existed, and there are several files of Churchill's private papers relating to the Focus. The Focus was a group of perhaps 30 or 40 leading British industrialists and bankers and former politicians who decided that Churchill was worth keeping afloat, and they funded him. They weren't all Jews. They were primarily Jewish, but they were also left-wing socialists and left-wing conservative members of parliament who all decided to keep him afloat. In July 1936, the then chairman of the British, of the Shell Petroleum Company, wrote out a cheque for Churchill of the order of £40,000, which in modern day money would be probably about $700,000, and gave it to him as a gift. He was Jewish. It was a Jewish gift to Churchill, and the intention was that Churchill, they bought him. He became the Pied Piper from that moment on. And the one who pays the piper calls the tune. If you look at the events as they really happened, until 1936, he hardly gave Germany a passing mention in his speeches and writings. Other things were more important. From 1936 onwards, he began beating the anti-Nazi, anti-German drum. And at that time, there was a great deal of pro-German sentiment in Britain, as witnessed the behavior of the Duke of Windsor, the King. King Edward VIII, who ruled for just less than a year after the death of his father, was very pro-German and pro-Hitler, and actually got on very well with Adolf Hitler when he visited Germany later in 1937. He was forced to abdicate by the same lobby, but it was this lobby which was financing Churchill from 1936 onwards, and which finally maneuvered and engineered his introduction into the cabinet in 1939, and finally his taking over as Prime Minister in 1940. He fought a war that Britain had no real interest in. I've repeatedly said this. Any logical perception of World War II now, looking back after 50 years, screams to the high heavens. And we can see quite clearly that we should have said to the Poles in 1939, you've got a problem with the Germans, sort it out yourself. We should have said to the Jews, you've got a problem with the Nazis, sort it out yourself. It's no concern of Britain and the British Empire. We've got other fish to fry. That's what we should have said. Churchill, unfortunately, was beholden to these people, and he had no alternative. So in 1940, when we had a choice put to us of accepting the very generous peace offer that was put to us, which has been concealed from the history books by the Germans, or fighting a totally senseless war onwards, Churchill took the wrong turning and bankrupted Britain and ruined the British Empire. I first said this in my book, Churchill's War in 1987, and now 5 other major historians have said the same thing. This has now become known as the revisionist line of history of Second World War, and I'm the one who actually opened up that path, making people think the unthinkable, looking at the alternative route that we could have taken in 1940. In 1941, just to end this, it becomes very interesting indeed, because the Weizmann papers, which are the papers of Chaim Weizmann, who was the first president of the State of Israel, and he was the leader of the international Zionist movement throughout World War II. The Weizmann archives, foolishly or wisely, gave me complete access to all the Weizmann correspondence with Churchill. And in the Weizmann archives are all Churchill's correspondence with Weizmann throughout the war years and before the war, and all his notes on his meetings with Churchill. And I'm only going to mention one of those letters here. It's a letter written by Chaim Weizmann, the leader of the Zionist movement, at that time living in the United States, to Winston Churchill in September 1941, 3 months before Pearl Harbor, when Churchill is frantically trying to claw the United States into his war, because that's his only salvation. And Weizmann writes to Churchill a letter which he says, Mr. Prime Minister, unless you grant us what we want, which is the creation of a Jewish army in the Middle East, with our own arsenal and our own weapons and our own uniform and our own flag, unless you grant us what we want, then you are not going to win us over. And let me tell you what we will do if you do grant us what we want. If you grant us our wishes, then we will act on your behalf in the United States. And remember, Mr. Churchill, he writes in this letter, remember, we are the only powerful, unified bloc in the United States which solidly backs the British cause in this war. September 1941. Everybody else is basically isolationist. We are the only ethnic, unified group which solidly backs the British cause. We are the only people who are in a position to bring the United States into this war. We did it in the last war, and we can do it again.
Churchill became the Gentile frontman of this secret group. Communist and Zionist Jews around Churchill included Sir Robert Munn, Sir Robert Valley Cohen, and Bernard Baruch. Both Roosevelt and Churchill became the Gentile frontman in the International Jewry War on Germany. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain told U.S. Ambassador to Britain, Joseph P. Kennedy, that the America and the world Jews had forced England into the war. The Jewish magazine Sentinel of Chicago, 8th of October 1940, said, "When the National Socialists and their friends cry or whisper that this war is brought about by Jews, they are perfectly right." Churchill left London to meet Roosevelt for a conference in Quebec late in the summer of 1943. A reporter asked if they were planning to offer peace terms to Germany. Churchill quickly replied, "Heavens no, they would accept immediately." Again, in the 1944 letter to his ally, the mass-murdering Bolshevik Joe Stalin, Churchill confirms the undeniable reality of Hitler's generous peace proposals. "We never thought of peace, not even in that year when we were completely isolated and could have made peace without serious detriment to the British Empire and extensively at your cost. Why should we think of it now when..."
Which there's a highway in my country named after him. He's a war criminal. Anyway, let's just keep it moving. Churchill even went as far as presenting Roosevelt with a fake Nazi map of their plan to take over the world. So there we go.
Fighting a desperate battle in history has recorded who fired the shot. Hitler has often guaranteed that his plans for conquest do not extend across the Atlantic Ocean. His submarines and raiders prove otherwise. For example, I have in my possession a secret map made in Germany by Hitler's government by the planners of the New World Order. Fake documents produced by the British Secret Service. It is a map of South America and a part of Central America as Hitler proposes to organize it. This is a time in October 1941 when Adolf Hitler had his hands full to invade Russia. He was busy fighting a desperate battle in the approach to Moscow. Things weren't going at all well outside Leningrad. His armies were struggling slowly forwards towards the Caucasus. And Hitler is apparently with his left hand going to take on the whole of South America and North America as well. The blithering idiot believed it. It's a map of South America. Today in this area, says Roosevelt, there are 14 separate countries. The geographical experts of Berlin, however, have ruthlessly obliterated all existing boundary lines and have divided South America into 5 vassal states, bringing the whole continent under their domination. This map makes clear the Nazi design not only against South America, but against the United States itself. And the Americans believed it because Roosevelt said it, and what he said was the truth, just like your newspapers tell you that I'm some kind of moderate fascist, and I've been saying it all these years. But it's not true. What is true is what you find in the archives. The fact that Churchill in May 1942, when the Americans were still not all that happy about fighting Germany instead of Japan, Churchill ordered the assassination of the Colombian foreign minister. Now let me just interject here that as a historian familiar with Adolf Hitler, I can tell you that unlike John F. Kennedy, unlike our own government, unlike Churchill in May 1942, Adolf Hitler did not order the assassination of one foreign politician. He killed quite a few people at home, of course, but no foreign politicians were on his hit list. Not so Winston Churchill. He sent an order to Bogota, the capital of Colombia, to assassinate, to rub out the local foreign minister. And this isn't just hearsay, what some general says after the war in the trial at Nuremberg to save his own skin. This is in the files of the American State Department because the local ambassador sent a rather worried telegram to Washington saying, "We've been asked by the British Embassy here to provide technical assistance to their man, Stagg, in liquidating the local foreign minister. Is this okay?" That telegram is in the files of the State Department, and the State Department immediately telegrammed back saying this is totally wrong. We are not going to provide assistance to the British in carrying out this murder. They've caused a lot of trouble to us already with fake documents, FBI documents, which turn out subsequently to have been faked with the intention of embroiling us in South America. And I was so intrigued by this particular plan, I went to great trouble and located Stagg. He's alive and well and living in Paris, and he confirmed to me rather shamefacedly that he had been ordered by the British, by his government, to liquidate the local foreign minister in May 1942. And I was rather puzzled by that because I couldn't understand why we would want to assassinate a foreign minister, and I thought perhaps the man was very pro-Nazi, or what would nowadays be called in the newspaper jargon a neo-Nazi. No, it turned out that this unfortunate Colombian, a man called Lopez de Mesa, was very pro-British. But he was due to retire in 3 weeks. So he was expendable, and Churchill ordered his assassination. He wasn't, in fact, he escaped, thanks to the Americans. Churchill ordered his assassination in order to be able to say that the Nazis had done it. This was typical Winston Churchill. In fact, John F. Kennedy, my favorite character in the Second World War, the American ambassador, rather, Joseph Kennedy. His father was the President, John Kennedy. Joseph Kennedy, the American ambassador in Britain, kept a diary in which he revealed precisely that he considered Churchill was capable of any cynical act to drag the United States into the war. By the United States, I mean the American people, because President Roosevelt wanted to go into the war. Asked in the cabinet meeting, which I quoted in my Churchill biography, in September 1938, in the Oval Office in the White House, Roosevelt was asked by one of his cabinet men, Mr. President, this crisis in Europe, the Munich crisis, is this good for the United States or bad? Roosevelt's answer, recorded by the Secretary of the Interior, Ickes, in his diary, was, any war in Europe can only be good for us. Any war in Europe can only be good for us. The European countries in a war will have to buy their arms and munitions from us, the United States. Already the gold of every European country is flooding across the Atlantic to us at a rate so great that we cannot provide enough warships to bring it over. This is Roosevelt's attitude towards war in 1998, a year before the actual outbreak of the European war. And so it went on in 1940. Kennedy thought that Churchill was quite capable of putting a bomb under the British embassy, the American embassy in Britain, which is 100 yards from where I live. A great big building was going to be blown up by Churchill, and Hitler would be blamed for it. Kennedy wrote that in his diary after one meeting with Churchill where he couldn't quite understand what Churchill was saying. And then Churchill went on to say, you wait, if I can get Hitler to start bombing London, then you Americans will have to come into the war. Churchill wanted Hitler to start bombing London in order to bring the Americans into the war, and eventually had to provoke it. I printed in my Churchill biography all the detailed telegrams and telephone conversations between Churchill and RAF Bomber Command, whereby he procured the bombardment of his own capital, London, by the Nazis, although he knew from code breaking that Hitler had ordered the Air Force not to bomb any British towns. Churchill knew from code breaking so much that this is one of the biggest gaps in the history of the Second World War by any historian until 1974. You can't believe any of the official histories, because the official historians were forbidden to make any reference to our code breaking operations. And it's the code breaking which is the big gap which turns up in 1941, showing how Churchill finally got the Americans into the war. I keep talking about these gaps, but they're so important because you're not going to find them in the official history books. They're gaps that are so big that the historians, including myself over past years, have just looked right through the gaps and we've wondered where the facts are to be found, without realizing that the gap itself is the evidence that there's something missing.
Words he used that night, expletive Jews. And to Officer Me, are you a Jew? And the Jews are responsible for all the wars in the world. Are those anti-Semitic words?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Sounds horrible. And I'm ashamed of that. That came out of my mouth. That I'm not that. That's not who I am, you know.
We have a world in which alcohol is used to excuse behavior.
It's always, alcohol is used to kill pain. And,
So basically, as you're getting the spill on it, Churchill hired a hit on a foreign minister in a foreign land. Let's keep it going, though. As if that's not enough proof of Jewish influence in Britain's side of things, take into consideration that Arthur Greenwood of the British War Cabinet promised the Jews a new world order. We also have a leaked personal letter from Lord Beaverbrook in 1938 discussing Jewish pressure to bring Britain into war. The Jews may drive us into war. Their political influence is moving us into that direction. Regardless of all the British support and driving into a world war, both the sold-out British leadership and the Jews knew they would need American help, and for that they set their sights on Franklin Roosevelt. New World Order pledged to Jews. New York Times, October 6, 1940. Arthur Greenwood of British War Cabinet sends message of assurance here. Writing of round scene, English rabbi delivers to Dr. S.S. Wise new statement on question after war. In the first public declaration on the Jewish question since the outbreak of the war, Arthur Greenwood, member without portfolio in the British War Cabinet, assured the Jews of the United States that when victory was achieved, an effort would be made to form a new world order based on the ideals of justice and peace. Mr. Greenwood, who is deputy leader of the British Labour Party, declared that in the New World, the consciousness of civilized humanity demand that the wrongs suffered by the Jewish people in so many countries would be righted. He added that after the war, an opportunity would be given to Jews everywhere to make a distinctive and constructive contribution in the rebuilding of the world. The message was delivered last week to Dr. Stephen S. Wise, chairman of the Executive Committee of the World Jewish Congress, by Rabbi Maurice L. Pereswig, chairman of the British section of Congress. Rabbi Pereswig arrived from England Monday evening. Intention to right wrongs. Comparing the statement with the Balfour Declaration of 1917, Dr. Wise declared that in a sense it had wider and further-reaching implications as it dealt with the status of Jews throughout the world. He said that Mr. Greenwood's message would be interpreted as a statement of England's firm intention to help right the wrongs which the Jews have suffered and continue to suffer today because of Hitler's disorder and lawlessness. Mr. Greenwood, sending the Jews of America a message of encouragement and warm good wishes, wrote, "The tragic fate of the Jewish victims of Nazi tyranny has, as you know, filled us with a deep emotion. The speeches of the responsible statesmen in Parliament and at the League of Nations during the last 7 years have reflected the horror with which the people of this country have viewed the Nazi relapse into barbarianism. The British government sought again to secure some amelioration of the lot of persecuted Jewry, both in Germany itself and in countries which are infected by the Nazi doctrine of racial hatred. Today, the same sinister power which has trampled on its own defenseless minorities and by fraud and force has temporarily robbed many of the small peoples of their independence has challenged the last stronghold of liberty in Europe. The New World Order forecast, when we have achieved victory, as we assuredly shall, the nations will have the opportunity to establish a new world order based on the ideals of justice and peace. This is where the United Nations comes from, In such a world, it is our confident hope that the conscience of civilized humanity would demand that the wrongs suffered by the Jewish people in so many countries should be righted. In the rebuilding of civilized society after the war, there should be and will be a real opportunity for Jews everywhere to make a distinction and constructive contribution. And all men of goodwill must assuredly hope that in a new Europe, the Jewish people in whatever country they may live in will have freedom and full equality before the law with every other citizen. In an interview at the Hotel Astor, Rabbi Pereswig declared that he was certain Mr. Greenwood speaks for England. There's a clear realization, he added, that the freedom and emancipation of Jewish people are tied up with the emancipation and freedom of people everywhere. The message, Rabbi Pereswig remarked, was the subject of the earnest consideration by the British government. Excuse me. This is a declaration on behalf of the whole world, he observed. Here, the British government expresses clearly what it hopes will take place after the war is won. And this is the man that made the pledge to the Jews. Apparently, Lord Beaverbrook thought so. Writing to Frank Gannett in December 1938, he made this striking statement: "The Jews are after Prime Minister Chamberlain. He's being terribly harassed by them. All the Jews were against him. They have got a big position in the press here in the UK. I am shaken. The Jews may drive us into war, and their political influence is moving us in that direction." And this is First Baron Beaverbrook. William Maxim Aitken, 1st Baron Beaverbrook, PCONB, was a Canadian-British newspaper publisher and backstage politician who was an influential figure in British media and politics in the first half of the 20th century. Jewish dude. Okay? While the U.S. wished to remain isolationist and had a large amount of pro-German sentiment as well, Roosevelt did his best to tiptoe around the war and never openly advocated for it. This, however, was mostly a facade. Roosevelt clearly was looking for a way to get into the war. He did assist the Allies early on while giving the image of being neutral. The Jewish influence on Roosevelt and his administration was immense. Some of the influential Jews that helped Roosevelt destroy the idea of the U.S. with the New Deal were Louis Brandeis, Felix Frankfurter, Henry Morgenthau Jr., and Sam Rosenman and Ben Cohen. FDR also had long-standing financial and vocal support from his days as New York governor. Some of the best early evidence on the American Jews and their influence leading America into World War II came from Polish diplomat Jerzy Potocki. The pressure of the news on President Roosevelt and the State Department is becoming even more powerful. So this is the Polish guy. Here he is saying it. The pressure of the Jews on President Roosevelt and on the State Department is becoming even more powerful. The Jews are right now the leaders in creating a war psychosis which would plunder the entire world into war and bring about general catastrophe. This mood is becoming more and more apparent in the definition of democratic states. The Jews have also created real chaos. They have mixed together the idea of democracy and communism and have above all raised the banner of burning hatred against Nazism. This hatred has become a frenzy. It's propagated everywhere, by every means, in theaters, in cinema, in the press. The Germans are portrayed as a nation living under the arrogance of Hitler, which wants to conquer the whole world and drown all humanity in an ocean of. Ambassador Potocki sent 2 more revealing reports to Warsaw. A short statement on January 9th included this remark: the American public is subject to an ever more alarming propaganda which is under Jewish influence and continuously conjures up the specter of the danger of war. Because of this, the Americans have strongly altered their views on foreign policy problems in comparison with last year. 3 days later came the longest and perhaps the most insightful report. The feeling now prevailing in the United States is marked by growing hatred of fascism and, above all, the Chancellor Hitler and everything connected with Nazism. Propaganda is mostly in the hands of the Jews, who control almost 100% of radio, film, daily, and periodical press. Although this propaganda is extremely coarse and presents Germany as black as possible. Above all, religious persecution and concentration camps are exploited. This propaganda is nevertheless extremely effective since the public here is completely ignorant and knows nothing of the situation in Europe. The prevalent hatred against everything which is in any way connected with German Nazism is further kindled by the brutal policy against the Jews in Germany and the Emerger problem. In this action, various Jewish intellectuals participated. For instance, Bernard Baruch, the governor of New York State; Lehman, the newly appointed judge of the Supreme Court; Felix Frankfurter, secretary of the Treasury of Morgenthau, and others who are personal friends of President Roosevelt. They want the president to become the champion of rights, freedom of religion and speech, and the man who in the future will punish troublemakers. These groups of people who occupy the highest positions in the American government and want to pose as representatives of true Americanism and defenders of democracy are, in the last analysis, connected by unbreakable ties with international Jewry. For this Jewish international, which above all is concerned with the interests of its race, to portray the President of the United States as the idealist champion on human rights was a very clever move. In this manner, they have created a dangerous hotbed for hatred and hostility in this hemisphere and divided the world into 2 hostile camps. The entire issue is worked out in a masterly manner. Roosevelt has been given the foundation I don't get to read the rest. What other things did Roosevelt's administration and American Jews do to get us into the war? For starters, the Lend-Lease Act of 1941, which allowed us to help allied nations without officially entering the war. Secondly, Jewish-controlled Hollywood went into overdrive to produce some anti-Nazi films. There was even a letter written from the Jewish Warner brothers, Jack and Harry Warner, to Roosevelt, that they would do all within their power to show the worthiness of the cause for war in Europe. It should also be noted that once the war started, the revenue that needed to be raised was immense. Never fear, a team of Jewish economists designed a new scheme to tax many more Americans and automatically take it from their checks. The Land-Lease Act, signed into law on March 11, 1941, allowed the U.S. to provide military aid to allied nations during World War I without formally entering the conflict, with the understanding that repayment would be considered in kind or through other benefits. Here's a more detailed explanation. Background. Before the United States officially entered World War II, it was in a period of isolationism, but President Franklin D. Roosevelt recognized the need to support the Allies fighting against the Axis powers. The Act's purpose. The Land-Lease Act, formerly titled an Act to Promote the Defense of the United States, authorized the U.S. to provide war materials, food, and other supplies to nations whose defense was deemed vital to the U.S.'s own security, which is bullshit, as you know. How it worked. The U.S. would lend or lease these supplies to the allied nations with the understanding that the repayment would not necessarily be in cash, but could be in the form of long-term leases for military bases or other benefits. To produce pro-war films did not start in earnest until 1937. It was well into it in 1939 before they began to appear. Early efforts like Confession of a Nazi Spy and The Beast of Berlin came out that year, set the stage for a flood of films over the next 3 years. In 1940, Hollywood released the graphic and high-impact films like Escape and Mortal Storm. Hitchcock's Foreign Correspondent came out that year, as did Chaplin's The Great Dictator. In May, two major studio heads, Jack and Harry Warner, otherwise known as Iskak and Hearst Wonkolaster, so they're not even Warner, what the fuck, wrote to Roosevelt, assuring him that they would do all in our power within the motion picture industry to show the American people the worthiness of the cause for which the free peoples of Europe are making such tremendous sacrifices. It's nice to see such unselfish, high-minded public service amongst corporate executives. Who to turn to? Ginsburg tells us, in the realms of both taxation and bond sales, Jews play major roles. The Treasury Department was, of course, run by Morgenthau, and he naturally had a team of Jewish economists and bureaucrats at his disposal, Jacob Weiner, Walter Salant, Herbert Stein, and a young Milton Friedman, among others. They determined that voluntary tax payments would be insufficient, so they decided to construct a scheme by which income tax would be involuntary paid. This is how income tax came to be. A number of Jewish economists championed the introduction of payroll, withholding, or collection at the source, a system that remains in place to the present day. By taking the tax from the citizen's employer every payday, this ensured that not only the mandatory payment, but steady revenue year-round. This, combined with a general lowering of the income threshold regarding who had to pay tax, dramatically increased the tax rolls and revenue. The original 1 million or so U.S. tax. This is why Republicans are against taxes, by the way. And here's the films. They're still there in posterity. Nazi Spy, Trapped, and so on. So that's why the Nazis are so infamous, by the way. It was a propaganda campaign to target Hitler and get him out of power. Finally, we have Pearl Harbor. Not only is there ample indications that the U.S. knew about the attack ahead of time, so it was a false flag operation, they helped force it with U.S. oil sanctions. We can look at some of the memos from FDR's war cabinet meetings to see that these discussions about allowing Japan to attack first. FDR imposed an oil embargo on Japan. FDR froze all Japanese assets in the U.S. Japan needed oil from the U.S. The U.S. knew this and backed Japan into a corner. Faced with the option of backing down to China or attacking the U.S., they attacked the U.S. Then Roosevelt got the war that he wanted, and now he had the political capital to wage it. If the U.S. was truly isolationist, why would they put an oil embargo on a trading partner? Because they weren't isolationists. The same Jewish bankers that got England into a war over conflict between Germany and Poland got the U.S. into the war also. And the West had been run by these Jewish bankers ever since. On the 19th of August, 1941, Churchill told his war cabinet that FDR was doing all he could to provoke an attack by the Axis of Powers, information which came to light only in 1972. Churchill said, Roosevelt was obviously determined that they, the U.S., should come in. The president said to me that he would wage war but not declare it, that he would become more and more provocative. If the Germans did not like it, they could attack American forces. Everything was being done to force an incident. The president has made it clear that he would look for an incident which would justify him in opening hostilities. Further comment is unnecessary. The closing portion of the September 1941 speech, he laid out FDR's three-part plan: prepare for war in the guise of defense, incrementally involve the U.S. in conflict situations, create a series of incidents which would force us into actual conflict. Near the end of his speech, he added, the war groups have succeeded in the first two of three major steps into war. Only the creation of sufficient incidents yet remains. An amazing prognosis given that the Pearl Harbor attack was just 3 months away. On the 25th of November 1941, 12 days before the attack, Roosevelt held a war cabinet meeting at the White House. Secretary of War Henry Stimson wrote the following in his diary that day. Roosevelt brought up the event that we were likely to be attacked perhaps next Monday, December 1st. For the Japanese are notorious for making an attack without warning. And the question was how we should maneuver them into position of firing the first shot without allowing too much danger to ourselves. It was a difficult proposition. Crazy, huh? The rest, as they say, is history. White people are no longer allowed to have countries. You can no longer criticize Jews if you're an anti-Semite. 6 million supposed Jews died in the Holocaust, but never mind the 75 million others that died. Basically, every war since has been with a nation that doesn't have a Jewish-controlled central bank. And Israel was created in 1948 and has demanded the Western government's unconditional support ever since. If you question it, you're an anti-Semite. If the white Western allies won World War II, it sure doesn't feel like it. So I just wanted you guys to know that the Jewish lobby that is now legalized in the United States has been around since the 19th century. What you may want to find out is how did the Jews become these pivotal pillars of society? How did they get into the banking system? How did they learn to control media? How were they so coordinated that they knew they need to do these things in these Western countries, go into certain areas and take over those areas? That's the question you should be asking yourself. The other question you should be figuring out is, how do we unravel that? Currently, the Jews, who also are responsible for the internet coming to be, by the way, they don't have perfect control over who does what on the internet. Clearly, my video is absolutely an example of this. So the question is, they do want to govern the world, but they don't want people to have freedoms. What you're seeing in Palestine is more what they want. And they say it's about freedom. They say it's about democracy, but then they control all the people who are in charge. They're just puppets. They fund them and they control them. So it's clear that Israel actually has the world under occupation, and any country that tries to work independent of them, which is why a Zionist is in Venezuela. This is why they're trying to get rid of Maduro. It's because he's not under their control and influence. The United States government is controlled by these Zionist Jews. And even when they weren't AIPAC, and even when they weren't other Israeli lobby groups, they had that influence, and they still have that influence over the media, over entertainment. It's not anti-Semitic to say, because we've seen the evidence. These are facts. These are facts. They practically run the world without a designated place and the acknowledgement that they do. What we are calling the shadow government, what we are calling the Illuminati, what we are calling the Masons and the Freemasonry and all of this is them. It's them. Isn't that something? Adolf Hitler tried in a very poor way to eliminate the problem, to eliminate their monopoly and control over things. That didn't work. So now anti-Semitic people have teamed up with these Zionist Jews, and they work together hand in hand to control the world. And when the chips fall where they may, they'll fight out with each other afterwards. And they're moving towards World War III. Make no mistake. That is why Congress is fighting to get Iran. And the world they want to reshape is one in which automation and AI dominate things. And whoever survives that is going to live the life of what the Palestinians live. The Jews are trying to get other nations to destroy each other, the world powers to destroy each other, so they can take over and run the world. This is what it is. And their philosophy makes sense. Their philosophy is, you know what's crazy though? They're such clever people, man. You got to admire them. They're coordinated. They're clever. They're evil. But you got to admire them. They realize, okay, we're going to be the smartest guy in the room. They literally are like Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor had Batman fight Superman. You know, Zack Snyder exposed so much shit with BVS. I understand why it is one of the worst movies out there. Because the Jews, he basically said what the Jews do. They pit one person, one power against another power. And they'll annihilate each other and they'll be the last person standing, right? It's clever. You got to give them that. But they're not on your side, America. And all these stupid senators who are taking these bribes from them for personal gain because they're so corrupt, they're destroying your country. And think for a second what I'm saying. After World War II, in which America had limited really involvement in that war, they came in pretty much at the end of it. Russia did most of the heavy lifting. But nonetheless, the Jews crippled Europe. Europe's still been trying to recover. Britain's been trying to recover. Ever since. Britain was a world power for a while, and then now it's not, right? And I'm asking myself these questions. You know, the fall of some of these great empires, like the Spanish Empire and the French Empire, did the Jews have anything to do with that? I'm wondering now. How far back does this go? You know what I'm saying? I think about it, you know, how they even were able to cause Christianity to get wiped out by Nero. You know, these Jews would go whisper in different people's ears. They've been doing this for years, ladies and gentlemen. They've been doing this for millennia. This ain't nothing new for them. You know what I mean? And I'm not speaking about all Jews, obviously. I'm speaking about the Jews that have influence, power, who have been trying to get this center of power. They've been trying to get it for the longest while. That's why Israel is in existence, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? They want to run things. They want to run the world. They think they're smart enough to run the world. Then they don't have the brawn and muscle and all that, but they're smart. And they got the devil on this. This stuff sounds so crazy when I say it, but it sounds crazy when I say this, but it is really true. They have the devil on their side. They have the devil on their side to take over the world. This is so freaking crazy. But the devil's not going to let them take over the world. And, he's got to be the boss, And that's what the Messiah that's coming back is an incarnation of the devil. This is crazy. I am talking this stuff, and I can't even believe I'm saying this stuff. It's so crazy to talk about. So, yeah. I mean, I just had to share this with you guys. I wanted you guys, now you guys need to go look at all the wars that may have happened before. And why did empires fall and all these crazy things? Because there's been a constant in this whole thing. And I'm not telling you guys to be against Jewish people. I have Jewish lineage. Okay, I'm related to the Jews. Okay, I still think Judaism is a great thing. I'm not anti-Jew just for the sake of being anti-Jew, and all the lower tier Jews, the people who are just, they don't know any better. I'm not against them. I know they grew up with, but there's a lot of Jews who worship Satan. It's just what it is. You need to get that into your head. Satanism and all of these other crazy things that have been happening. Look at the people who started it. Look at the people who started these things. Even white supremacy, which is a distorted thing, it's not just a pushback on Zionism. It's also came from Zionism. So that's why the anti-Semites are friends with the Zionists, because the Zionists think like the anti-Semites. So anyways, I just thought I would share that with you guys. I hope you guys were informed and entertained once again. It's crazy, bro. It's just crazy what this world is coming to. And I wanted to make sure that Kojay and Muhammad and a bunch of other people knew about this history. And you can go ahead and do some more research and study into it and see. But this is something that you need to check out, and it's backed by facts. If you want to go into even more of it, you can look at Clemens and Blair's Jewish Hand in World Wars. You can also do your own homework and go into some more historical stuff. Don't just look at this side of the story. Look at both sides. Make sure you got a balanced point of view to see that everything that I'm saying is true and makes sense. But I ended up stumbling upon this, and I was like, oh, so it's really true. This New World Order stuff, it really started back in 1920 something. 1930 something, it was promised this New World Order. That's how you got the United Nations and all these things came into existence because of a promise made by a Brit. So yeah, that's all I got to say for now. And I think the British believe also that they're God's chosen people, and there's something about the sword in the stone and a whole bunch of stuff. So anyways, I'm going to stop right here, and I'm going to leave it at that. You guys have a good one. Do some more homework. This thing is deeper. The rabbit hole goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And I'm glad I took this time out to talk to you guys about this topic. I got to go and work. God bless you guys. I still believe in the Most High. I ain't going to change that. I'm sorry about the curse words and stuff I said in there. I also have to battle against my online pornography stuff, which again I'm embroiled in. I'd be very transparent with everybody about my life and my progressions and stuff, but I just wanted to share that with you guys. It's a lot deeper than you think, and it goes a lot further back, and there's a lot more to know about. Like they said, 6 billion Jews died in World War II. I think that number is more like 4 million, but be that as it may, it's still a horrible thing. What people don't know is that 75 million people actually died in World War II, and a lot of atrocities happened in World War II that we don't really discuss. So, be that as it may, take for it what you think or whatever you want. It is what it is. I'll catch you guys later. You guys have a great day.